Okay, you are all set, Commissioner.
All right, very good then. Good evening, everyone. This is another meeting of the Body Worn Cameras ad hoc. Today, September 6th, 2022. And we're going to go around. I'm just going to call everybody's name who's present right now. Lieutenant Joe Turner, I'm just looking at my screen, is here. Officer Felicia Cervantes is here from OPD. Frida Caro is here from CPRA. Kiona Subtle is here from OPD. Jason Wechter is here from CPRA. Katie Dixon is here from the ACLU. Jody Geddes is here from the from Our Joy Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. Pastor Jacqueline Thompson is here from Allen Temple Baptist Church, and Commissioner Marsha Peterson is here from OPD. I'm sorry, from the OPC, Oakland Police Commission. What we're going to do is to continue with going through our body worn camera policy. And I understand that I was not present at the last meeting, the August 23rd meeting, but I do understand that you've gotten up to section D. So we'll begin with section D, accountability and internal investigation reviews. Is there anything from anyone to before we get to that? And I'll just note that at the end, there are a couple of things at the beginning that I had a couple of questions about, but we can go back to those. And one housekeeping matter, can we make a note? What I'd like to do is for us to add a footer on the documents so that we will know what version, so what version we're on. So if we can do a date in the footer, so each time we get a new version, it'll have a different date at the bottom of it. I think that'll help us keep track as well. Okay. If no housekeeping matters of any kind, why don't we go ahead, Lieutenant Turner, can turn the screen over to you and we can start going through the policy. But I do want to say good evening officially to everybody on the record, and I want to thank everybody for joining us for this meeting, and also for your commitment and dedication to this policy. Go ahead.
All right, yeah, Officer Cervantes will actually share her screen and take us through the document.
Oh, okay, all right, go ahead, Officer Cervantes.
Yes, ma'am, but before I start that, Commissioner Shea actually brought up the last meeting. He was kind of curious as to why patrol officers do not activate their cameras in regards to sexual assault victims. I did some follow-up with the Special Victims Unit. I don't know if all of you are interested in hearing about what I was told from the supervisor over there. I can always send in my notes, or I could also inform everyone here if you guys like. If anyone's interested in that.
I'm interested. I'm interested.
Okay, absolutely, Vice Chair Peterson. So when I spoke to the supervisor at the Special Victims Unit, the first part, so he wants to make sure that we're adhering to the 293 Penal Code and 6254 of the Government Code, protecting the victims and ensuring that their confidentiality remains intact, including their immediate family. So when it comes to video and redactions, we're very limited on people who can actually redact in those videos. So to limit to ensuring that they remain confidential, we limit the videos from the front end. He couldn't put a year on that, so I'm not going to speak to when this actually started to happen, but that's the first part. But the second part is going to be, as a responding officer, we want to ensure that the victims are comfortable speaking to us, so we like to build rapport. Also from past victims and current advocates, they also suggest that the patrol officers do not have their cameras on so they can build that relationship as well. Another big reason is to ensure we avoid victim shaming, and that's a big part of why we have our cameras off for the patrol response. And then along when we take these calls, especially if it's juvenile involved, we want to also ensure that Calico has the interview with them on not on camera, but when they speak to them, they're professionally trained when speaking with victims of that kind, especially if they're underage. So that's what was told to me from our Special Victims Unit. That's part of If I can answer any questions, I'll try to, but that's what I got from them. If not, I will jump right into sharing my screen when it comes to.
Hold on a second. Commissioner Peterson, is that, do you have any other questions or anything? No, I guess not. Okay, all right.
All right.
Any questions from anyone else on that issue?
Okay, and were they referencing?
I think we lost you, Commissioner Peterson. Commissioner Peterson, we lost you, but maybe when you transition home, we'll come back to you. So we'll go ahead, Officer Cervantes.
Yes, ma'am. All right. Let's see here. Can everyone see the section D accountability and internal investigation reviews?
Mhm.
Everyone, okay. So D1 is basically, we're gonna go over what the supervisors and commanders, they can review all their subordinates, their performance and training if it's necessary to ensure that the officers are adhering to policy compliance, including compliance with the revisions of this policy, to ensure that the officers are consistent between their report writing and the videos that are being present during the investigations. Supervisors also have to, this is going to be a big part, they have to know when members, they do not activate or deactivate their camera as required by this policy. So they shall determine if it's delayed or not activated was reasonable based upon the circumstances. So supervisors are held to this during this policy. Supervisors and commanders determine if they determine that the delay or non-activation was reasonable, they shall document the justification in the appropriate report. So if no report is generated, this shall be documented in a supervisory note file for the officer. The supervisors, commanders shall be advised and their name noted in the SNF file. Supervisors and commanders and managers who discover any of these class 2 misconduct during their review of the body worn camera, it doesn't constitute a pattern or anything like that, then it can just be documented straight in SNF as long as it's just a class 2 violation with no previous patterns.
And in that, just grammatically, shall be documented in a supervisory note, not an. Before the SNF, before the SNF parens,
Here,
there should be
okay.
a. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Fix that. All right. Does anyone have any questions so far about the review?
Okay.
Good evening, Officer Cervantes and everyone. I do. My first question is, how does this connect with is it C3? I think that's the first reference we get to supervisors being able to review their own files and subordinate files. Is that C3?
Oh, going up,
Mm-hmm.
supervisors and commanders are authorized to review their own body worn camera video files, all video files of their subordinates, and as necessary to complete required duties, any associated video files. So this is just the viewing. That's just gonna reference what we can view. And
Who
then
can view it?
supervisor and commanders are authorized to review their own.
Because my thing is continuity, it seems like if there were a quick reference to that policy in the opening statement of D1, then some of that language could be cut.
Right.
I think we've already established that they can review their own files and their subordinate files, and it would seem, reading the whole section, that the purpose of this section is to really lay out their purpose in review. And so some of that opening language you kind of get lost in. So not delaying the time in terms of trying to wordsmith it right now, but if we can make a note to just visit that and see if there's a way to reference the previous policy and cut some of that opening language, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, ma'am. I'll making a comment for that right now. Reference C3.
Very good. Okay,
Thank you. And then moving down to, I'll skip 2 for now. If we move down to number 3,
You want to,
not D3, I think I'm sorry, the 3rd paragraph.
okay, number 3 on section D1.
Yes.
Alrighty.
Well, actually, I can't do that without going to the 2nd. So when you say if a supervisor or commander determines that the delay or non-activation was reasonable, that whole thing about you're going to determine if an activation or deactivation or non-activation was reasonable. If it wasn't activated, then what are they viewing? How is that determination made?
So,
And it's certainly just my ignorance. I just want to understand.
so supervisors and commanders who discovered, so the camera could be late in activation. There could be, it depends on what they're assessing. It could be associated with use of force, and if supervisor determines that if the late activation was appropriate, it would based on case by case scenario. So if they have to address the threat, then they're going to assess that. Or if it's late or certain things that are discovered, like I said, it's case by case scenario. Depends on what incident they're doing or where they're coming from. What were they doing before? Were they using the bathroom before? It just depends on the specific incident. That's why this leaves the supervisor, commanders, and managers up to discretion as to what is appropriate for that case.
Okay. But the assumption is that there is something to view.
At some point, there's probably going to be an associated video, whether it's the officer or a cover officer or something of that sort.
Okay. All right. And then my last question is related to number 3 is what constitutes a pattern?
That's a great question. Yeah, so Lieutenant Turner, I'm gonna.
And
Sure.
I mean, whatever it is, again,
No,
because continuity is my thing, I think it would be important to either switch your word out or make reference to it.
no,
Other
Right.
than that,
Yeah.
you walk away with the question that I have. So
Yeah,
again, just trying to establish clarity, not just for the officers who will read it, but for community members, if it will be public as well.
Yeah.
So that folks won't assume that a pattern is arbitrary.
right. Yeah, that is a good question. And I think that's something that the department and even oversight bodies, to include the monitoring team, are still trying to sort of wrap their heads around. What I've seen in terms of our review is that basically three instances within about a year will constitute a pattern, 3 or more. So that's typically now, and things are going to be dependent, so of course, and a little bit going back to your previous question, it is going to depend, and the supervisor is going to have to look at other evidence, right? Like you mentioned, it's kind of assumed that the body worn camera is on. And so if it wasn't on, then there's, and it was required to be on by policy, it's up to the employee to say why it was that, this didn't happen. So, then if there are instances where it's a continuous sort of showing up, and it's kind of, I think in the same way that any workplace grapples with how is someone's workplace behavior? When is something a mistake? When have they just sort of messed up or need to be reminded? And when has their behavior become a pattern of behavior that needs progressive discipline? That's a difficult one that the department has continued to work on. Like I said, I've seen about 3 in a year be a pattern, but it really is a little bit dependent. That might even be less if there's clear evidence that say someone is disregarding policy.
Thank you for that. And again, I would ask that we just kind of place a little asterisk there with a note that either says revisit the word or bring some clarification, with the understanding that the department is grappling in it. You may not be able to define it, but
Right.
perhaps there's another word that can be established so it doesn't raise this kind of question. And again, my goal is always to ensure that folks don't leave thinking that the policy is arbitrary, that everybody, it's clear
Absolutely.
and it's clear across the board.
Absolutely.
So that was it. I'm sorry, Chair. Carmen Forte.
No, perfect. No, don't, nothing to apologize for. Thank you so very much. What we have is Commissioner Peterson. I'm gonna call on her, and then I want to go back to the 2nd paragraph of number 2. I have some questions about that. But Commissioner Peterson, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize. I was knocked off the meeting. I went through a dead zone on my way home. But with respect to this question of pattern, we have been informed that sometimes we don't know that there's a pattern unless it comes up as a part of the random audit that is done of body worn cameras. Isn't that true, Lieutenant Turner? So,
Well, so any kind of pattern, yeah, you have to discover it, right? So you don't know
Right.
sort of what you don't know. That's true. That's one of the reasons why we do a lot of these sort of random and review, is to try and maybe catch up something that might otherwise not be immediately seen.
correct. So unless officers don't self-report not having their body worn camera, it has to be maybe observed by another officer. Or what are the ways that you have found that you discover your patterns beyond just observations in reports, self-reporting, or what have you?
Yeah, well, actually, and without stealing too much of what Officer Cervantes is going to go into, it's mainly through these accountability and internal investigation reviews. So as we kind of go through the section, you'll see some other places: random accountability review, specific incident review, use of force review, pursuit review, complaint review. Basically, a lot of triggers that make it so that a supervisor and commander, for instance, multiple people have to review the video. So in that point, then they're looking for those things that we just started talking about. They're looking at their performance, they're looking at policy compliance, and they're looking at consistency. So when you start seeing, looking for those things, you look at each video and that you're required to look at, and there are many that the supervisors are looking at every week or month. And you're looking at things like, did this person start the video on time? Were other people on, having their cameras on, and then a certain officer did not? And that's, you can see by, based on the incident. So you start looking and seeing these things, and that's where you start seeing a pattern. So it's kind of, again, very similar to supervision at any job site, where the sort of more time you're spending looking over, developing your subordinates, the more that you understand their patterns of works, their habits, and how we look at them, and where areas are maybe that they need to get better. And just a sort of final thing with a pattern is that is the pattern language is in our policy about misconduct complaints. So it does talk about this. This is actually language that we use in that. So I do agree that we need to flag it here, and then sort of maybe talking in an overarching place about where that might go, or how we might work back towards that misconduct policy or the complaint policy, and then talk about it and sort of going forward.
Okay, well, I'll let Officer Cervantes do her report.
Okay, no worries. And Commissioner Peterson, you had a question just before you were cut off regarding the sexual assault victims, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask that question. Let's finish D1, and then we'll have Officer Cervantes respond to the question you still had about victims of sexual assault. I want to go to second paragraph of number 2. Here, if the supervisor commander determines. Okay, so is this saying that, okay, supervisor commander says the delay or non-activation was reasonable, then they document the justification. And then it says, if no report is generated. Does that mean that if the supervisor or commander does not generate a report, then it'll be documented in the supervisory notes file for the officer, and then it says the supervisor's commander shall be advised and the name noted in the NSF. What is that? Who's doing what, and who is responsible for doing what, and whose name is going to be noted in the NSF?
And so if there's no associated like pursuit investigation or use of force investigation, it can be documented that there is a delay or non-activation by a supervisor. And I'm assuming that no report is generated, this shall be documented in a supervisory note file for the officer. So the supervisory note file will be under the officer who had the justified, delayed, or non-activation for that incident.
So who is to, if no report is generated by whom?
It would probably be the investigating sergeant, whoever's doing the investigation. And then if there's, depends
So
on,
the investigating sergeant is different from the supervisor or commander.
so it'll start with, it depends on the situation again. So if it's a use of force investigation or a J4 or pursuit investigation, it's going to be looked at by the sergeant first, and then it'll go from the sergeant to a lieutenant. So if there's no associated investigation, there's going to be a supervisory note file that can be created by the supervisor's commander, and it'll have the officer's name on the file. At least that's the way I read it.
Yeah, that supervisor, commissioner that you're talking about, yeah, that is the same person that's conducting any report. So this I think is designed for like if the random review. So normally, or the majority of these reviews that supervisors are doing, it's because they're doing some sort of associated report or investigation that will end up with a report, like a investigation into a complaint or a pursuit or a use of force will require a report by the supervisor. But it's possible, definitely possible that that during a random review, a random audit, that the body worn camera is not on, or not on in a timely fashion, for instance. And then let's say the supervisor says, oh, okay, I looked at that, and actually that was one where you were sitting there at Starbucks and then a person ran up and you had to act. And so then instead of turning on the camera, so I've determined that's reasonable, but there's no police or there's no report that I'm generating. I'm not doing any sort of investigation report or anything. So I'm going to document the fact that this was reasonable in their supervisory notes file, and then let the commander know. So that's advised. It's mainly just a check to ensure that the supervisor is properly determining whether or not this delay or non-activation is reasonable. It's really around ensuring that delays or non-activations are very rare.
Okay, and whose name is going to be noted in the NSF?
Yeah, sorry. I think that's supposed to be the commander. So the commander of that supervisor. I think those last two are sentences there. If no report is generated, maybe we can just fix that or work on those a little bit so they make a little bit more sense.
Okay, then. So it'll be the supervisor's name noted.
That person's commander. So
I'm sorry, so
they're
the
supervisor.
Supervisor or commander.
That's right.
Their names will be noted in the NSF.
Yeah.
SNF rather.
Yes, SNF.
NSF, non-sufficient funds. Okay. SNF. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So the clarity should be down in that second part of it. The supervisor's commander shall be advised and their name noted in the SNF. So that's too where the clarification needs to be, specifying whose name. Okay.
Thank you. Supervisors,
Right.
by supervisors.
Okay. So is there, and so we got 3, we're gonna try to clean up the language about class 2 and get some clarity about what that's gonna entail, or some kind of definitions or something.
At the very least, we'll refer back to to our complaint policy, because that is where the pattern language originally lies, and then some clarification hopefully is forthcoming there.
Okay, all right. So before we go to D2, why don't we go back and clean and with the discussion, Commissioner Peterson, that you were having with Officer Cervantes about the policies and protocol regarding sexual assault victims.
Yes, thank you. I think Officer Cervantes was speaking from her notes, and I was going to ask her when she spoke with whomever and made those notes, were they referencing a policy on that undergirds or otherwise advances what she was telling us? Is there some sort of written policy around the privacy issues? I mean, they make perfectly good sense. But I was just wondering, is there a cross-reference in any way to a written policy?
So the report writing manual states for the patrol officers that we shall not have our camera activated during those investigations. But as far as the specific special victims unit policy, when it comes to the actual referencing 293 PC and 6254 of the government code, I'm not sure. I'll have to follow up if there's a specific policy for that.
Okay, I was just curious if there's some way we can perhaps cite to something here in the body worn camera why the cameras are not activated or they are deactivated during those specific type of interfaces with the police and the public.
Yes, ma'am. I think kind of trying to go back up to see if there's kind of a not required. All right. I will make note of that and I'll come back to that on our next meeting.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Is it okay to go on to D2?
Correct. Let's go ahead.
All right, so this is what Lieutenant Chairman was referencing earlier, the supervisor's random accountability review. So currently the other required duties of our supervisors, they are required to review body worn cameras monthly, and supervisors shall ensure that each selected recording has a minimum length of 10 minutes. So that's another accountability measure that's been implemented and still being implemented. Commissioner Peterson, did you have a question about this one?
No, I did not.
All righty. So moving on to section D3, supervisor specified incident review. They are also during the reviews, any arrest or the arresting officer and the officer who's been assaulted, they have to review any pertinent documents or body worn cameras for 69 of the penal code, resisting or deter peace or executive officer, the 148, resist, delay, or obstruct a peace officer, and then any battery on a peace officer. So for any of these incidents, supervisors shall at minimum review the body worn cameras of the primary arresting officers, like I said before, and the officer who was the victim, or both, if there's multiple officers, all the officers, and of the engaged person, and then starting from the officer's initial interaction with the subject of the arrest until the arrestee has been controlled. Any questions for section D3?
Officer Cervantes.
Yes, Pastor.
The last paragraph in that section, during incidents involving multiple, that whole section that references use of force. As a layperson, I'm not familiar with the codes that are used. So are any of those codes in A, B, or C use of force?
So these are the penal codes that's going to be the violation of the offender. And then this is straight from the penal code.
Okay, so the use of force reference really is handled or addressed in D4?
We're going to go into the investigation review for the supervisors and what they have to do for that part.
Okay, and again, for continuity's sake, I think that paragraph might be misplaced because it's referencing something that we haven't even raised earlier in that section. So we just either want to wordsmith it or make a note to
Possibly move it.
Mhm.
over.
Good point. Okay.
Make a note real quick from Pastor. Possibly move.
And Commissioner Peterson, your hand is still up from before, or do you have a new comment?
I do not. I'll lower my hand. Sorry.
All right. Thanks.
All right. So going on to the force investigation reviews, this is going to be for the level 2 through level 4 use of force. So when supervisors are investigating a use of force, they shall conduct a review of any of the pertinent body-worn camera for all members who are witness or involved during that use of force. So when approving or investigating any of these use of force, supervisors shall document the pertinent section of the body-worn camera recordings of the specific members who's actually used the force. So if they determine the use of force was in compliance by department policy, that's something that they're gonna review, is any of the use of force allegate or investigations reported. The body-worn camera related to documents level 4 type 32 use of force, where the type 32 is the only force type is required under certain circumstances reference. So we have Lieutenant Turner's referencing Special Order 9208. Recently, the level 4 type 32 investigations, supervisors do not have to review every single type 32 allegation, or not allegation, use of force. If there's no other complaint or any complaint of campaign or anything else in regard to type 32, they're not required to review that particular body-worn camera if there's nothing else associated to it. So no injury, no complaint of pain, no other allegations made, but they are in training. It is recommended that they still review it, but it's not required. Just for the type 32. The rest of them is required.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? If not, I will expect you to raise your hand or chime in if you have any comments or questions on, otherwise we'll keep going.
Alrighty. So supervisors are also required to review the vehicle pursuit investigations. All involved in the actual pursuit at any point during the pursuit. So even if they become, if they're number 1 in the pursuit and someone else takes over, they're still required to review all the involved officers in the pursuit until the termination of the involvement in their pursuit. So the one thing that isn't here, if you are riding with an ADAM partner, so if I have someone with me in the car, the approving or investigating supervisor, they may review only one of the body-worn camera members' footage for that incident.
Okay.
Alrighty.
May I ask a question just for clarity?
Sure.
Both in sections D4 and D5, what is meant by the use of the word approving in this context?
Let me try on that one. So the approving is actually as a supervisor or maybe even a commander is approving the investigation or report of a use of force or pursuit, and then investigating is actually looking into it. So the way that our supervisory sort of structure typically works is that a supervisor, also known as a sergeant, will be the one doing most of these investigations into uses of force or pursuits or something like that. Certain very low-level uses of force are reported. So there's a report, for instance, if the officer uses like what's called a control hold, where they take hold of the person's arm maybe and then pull them into their arm into a place where they can put the person into handcuffs. So not something like striking or using a weapon or anything like that, but still an application of force. And that's when the officer will report that force and the supervisor approves that use of force report. So they still review the police report. They still look at the body-worn camera, things like that. But they don't necessarily do a full investigation like they do here.
So
And
then would it be problematic to simply say when approving a report?
well, it is because there are some of these uses of force or pursuits where the level has increased. So let's say someone gets injured or the officer uses a weapon during their use of force. Then instead of approving, they are investigating.
Right, so that's the clarity I'm making. So if the sentence read when approving a report, right, because that's one level, if it's just a report, or investigating, keeping investigating, but just clarifying what's being approved, so we don't assume it's the investigation that's being approved.
Yeah, I think we can work on that, maybe just say investigating, as
Okay.
opposed to approving, yeah.
Yeah.
And that way it will be a little clearer.
Eliminate that inquiry that's kind of nuanced in a way
Right.
that may not need to come up. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we'll just have one investigating in the next paragraph as well.
So that one I think would just be approving, all right, because it's level 4s, they don't investigate those.
Okay.
And then whatever would be appropriate for D5 as well.
Yeah, so vehicle pursuits are either or. It's going to depend. So we don't, unlike use of force in every vehicle pursuit, even, so I think that would probably, we just say investigating then, yeah, because there's, I think even in a level 3, there's a bit of investigation, so we'll stay with that, investigating.
Okay. So when investigate, okay.
Changes made.
Okay. All right,
All right.
great. I don't see any other comments, Pastor, before we leave that.
No, that was it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterson.
Is there going to be a glossary of terms? Even earlier, when you made the distinction, when you said a supervisor is also a sergeant. So we make, alternate references. And here approval is different than investigating. I'm just curious. Is there a need for a glossary of terms?
You know what, I think there both is, and then it's not for this policy, I guess is what I'd say, is overall, yeah, it would be really helpful for a glossary of terms. A lot of these terms that are used in different parts of the policy. So sometimes you'll hear us kind of, or sorry, I should say in different policies. So sometimes you'll hear us talking or using some sort of acronym or jargon or something like that. We try as much as possible not to do that when we're speaking with the public, but in the policies, they said these terms tend to be used over and over, things like investigation or approval or DLI or something like that. And
UOF.
Yeah, so it'd be helpful if there was a glossary for all the policies that said, hey, these are, so I think that would be something that we'd strive for. I don't think we'd necessarily say it on each policy because so many of them refer back to something else. So like, for instance, this is just sort of an ancillary part of our overall use of force investigation policy, which is K4.1, or sorry, K4. Which is in itself a whole 30-page policy with many other terms.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, it would be helpful, but
None exists.
No, none exists, unfortunately. It's yeah, there's been so much OTJ training for so long that I think
Is there a possibility of creating one?
Oh, absolutely, anything's possible.
I would like for you to. I know that Lieutenant Turner, you touch all of these policies. So I would make that a request that there be a glossary of terms.
Absolutely, I'm gonna put that down.
All righty.
You don't have enough to do, Lieutenant Turner.
I know that's true.
Yeah, you got all this free time. You're sitting around twiddling your thumbs and everything.
True,
So,
yeah.
so we want to make sure you earn that big money you're making.
I appreciate that. Need to be intellectually stimulated. Sure.
All right, great. Okay, any other comments before we leave D5? Okay. Commissioner Peterson is dropping her hand down. She's lowering her hand, I think.
All right.
Okay, great. Let's go with D6 then, see what we get.
All righty, so this is gonna be your DLI's division level investigation review. So when they're doing their investigations, they're gonna be assigned to an investigator and at minimum review body worn camera footage that is pertinent to the investigation, and it will provide evidentiary value or assist in completing the investigation. All right. Those are for your DLIs. Gonna move on then to section D7. This is for our level 1 investigation review. This is gonna be referencing the BOI PNP 1901, so the Bureau of Investigations. All body worn camera recordings shall be uploaded to evidence.com as soon as practical and involved or, so this is gonna be a level 1 incident. So any body worn camera that has to be taken from the scene and secured by a supervisor, commander, or an appropriate investigator as necessary. And then the recording shall be uploaded by personnel designated by the CID investigator. After the recordings are uploaded, this is pretty much walking through the steps that we're supposed to be taking during the BOI of PNP 19-01. This is why it's level referenced right here. The CID investigator shall ensure the chain of custody is documented in the report, and then the personnel that's actually uploading the body worn camera footage, they shall not view the files unless authorized by that investigator of the actual level 1. Then during the level 1, no personnel involved in or a witness incident may view any body worn camera prior to being interviewed by the appropriate investigation unit. And they must receive command approval from then on. Once a member once the member's reports have been submitted, approved, and the member that has been interviewed by the appropriate investigator for that level 1, the investigator may show the member his or her audio and video footage, the body worn camera footage. And this will occur prior to the conclusion of the interview process. So they can be interviewed before. They'll write down what they observed during that level 1 or during that actual encounter. And then after that, they can choose, depending on the investigators, to review it. The officer can review it, and the personnel will be given the opportunity to provide an additional information to supplement their statement and maybe ask additional questions by the investigators after that review. And this is going to be referenced again to level 1 investigation is pretty lengthy. I want to say it's like close to a 40-page policy when it comes to level 1 investigations. They're very thorough when it comes to level 1 investigations, obviously taken really seriously. All righty. Anything from anybody for level 1 investigations? I don't see any hands. All righty. So we'll go with D8, command review. Following the investigation and approval of a level 2 or level 3 use of force by a supervisor, both the investigators and their first level commander and the division commander shall conduct a review of any pertinent section of the body worn camera recordings for all members who are a witness who are involved in the use of force. So this command review, again, goes back to the level 2 or level 3 use of force policy. Consent term.
Yeah, let's make that following the investigation. I think we can cut out and approval there.
There, yes.
Yeah. Good catch.
Officer Cervantes, so this was my idiosyncratic note, but under command review, if there were a dash that said level 2 or level 3, is what I wrote down only because the previous D7 is so focused on level 1. So that as soon as you come to it, you will know that this is level 2 or level 3. Even though it's referencing command and not necessarily giving a full laid out process.
You want me to, so command review for
Dash, yep, thank you.
all righty.
Sure.
Is that Pastor Thompson?
Yes, thank you.
Anytime. All right, moving on to section D9. This is going to be another auditing that Lieutenant Turner was referencing earlier. The Vice Chair Commissioner Peterson brought up how do we keep track of possibly someone not having their camera. So our Office of Internal Accountability staff, when conducting audits, along with supervisors, commanders, and active field training officers and the FTO coordinator, are authorized to view body worn camera files to assist with conduct of audits and inspection. So the OIA, or evaluate the performance of the members, subordinate, or trainee members unless otherwise prohibited by this policy. Yes, ma'am.
How often are the audits conducted?
So I know for the supervisor review, they go into the monthly audits, the 10-minute minimum, which was up here. But as far as the OIA, I am not sure of how often and when they do the audits, just depends. Go ahead.
So OIA does audits of the department at least quarterly. They choose, typically they do 1 or 2 audits per quarter, but they use the generally accepted government auditing standards. So that includes a lot of different, or many more things than just a supervisor looking at random review. So they do things like they select a random sample, they gather all policies, they might talk to subject matter experts in the area that they're auditing to determine what training is, they might attend a training, so all that. So that's why they only really typically turn out that office about 1 to 2 audits per quarter, and that's generally around the same you're going to see from an auditing staff of that size. So the OIA audits, though, they used to be called OIG before the Police Inspector General.
Right.
But their audits are available online, those independent audits that office does.
And so how many, I imagine officers' files or body worn camera videos, how many in a sample? What's a sample? Like how many?
It is really going to depend on what they're looking for. So for instance, the department or the OIA recently completed a few audits on like use of force. And so I think they sampled somewhere around 50 reports. And then from those reports, they found, I think, about 20 actual officers that they wanted to review body worn camera footage. So what they do in their audits is they will set out what they're looking for, what their sample size is. They will name it. It's very similar to like an academic paper where they'll set forth the sample size. They'll talk about how they came to that sample. So it's really going to depend on how much work it is. For something where they're reviewing videos, the sample size is likely going to be smaller because that's going to be a lot more work. For something where they're just counting a number or ticking a box when they say that a certain event has happened, and they can like review an Excel spreadsheet, the sample size might be like 3 months worth of data, for instance. So it really kind of depends on what it is that they're looking for.
And have you found in your experience that these audits do reveal a limited number or substantial number of deviations from the policy, the body worn camera policy? Like turning on or late to turn on or
Yeah.
things like that?
In my experience, they have found not a massive amount, but they've definitely found deviations from the policy, and those have strengthened our policy. So for instance, one of the ones that we talked about, these required reviews from supervisors, that actually came about, and that's the requirement for the supervisors to look at body worn camera when the officers make an arrest for resisting, obstructing, fighting with officers, etc. That came out of an audit by the OIA because they determined that those arrests had, on average, more often force. And so then having the supervisors review those to ensure that force was caught and properly reported was important. So these, they are a self-correcting tool. So they do find deviations, and then we are able to incorporate some of the things they find into either training or policy or practice, depending on the circumstances. And, of course, occasionally, rarely, but occasionally they do find misconduct, and those get sent to internal affairs.
Thank you.
Okay, I think on that language there, where were we? There should be, looks like there's an S apostrophe that may be missing. And D9, let's see, or evaluate the performance of members, subordinate, or trainee members. What is, who is it? Should be members plural possessive with an apostrophe after the S. If not, what is members subordinate?
I think that was designed to say that, so it's designed to talk, that is referencing the supervisors and commanders, that they can view body worn camera files to assist with audits, inspections, or to evaluate the performance of their own subordinates. Right.
So there should be a possessive somewhere, either an apostrophe S or S apostrophe or something.
Yeah, I think it's
Maybe it
supposed to
should
say
be.
subordinate members instead of member subordinates.
Okay, then, all right. Is that what it is? Okay, then, the performance of subordinate members,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, so we
Or
just,
of subordinate or trainee members.
right, yeah, so we're wording
Okay,
it trainee members, that's
So
probably.
just delete the first member. You can take out the members that you add, the word members that you just added, Officer Cervantes. You
Take
can
this out?
delete that one too.
Oh, yeah, sorry, subordinate or training members, yeah.
So it will read, out of the inspections or evaluate the performance of subordinate or trainee members. Unless otherwise prohibited by policy, okay. And no comma after subordinate, right?
No, there's,
Yeah, so there's no change there, okay.
no, it's just the red mark won't go away until we approve the changes. There's no comma.
Okay. Yeah, no comma after subordinate. Okay, ma'am, okay, right. Okay, let's go on to E then.
Okay. Yeah, do you want, why don't, all right, I can give you a break and do section E there, if you
Yes.
don't mind controlling the view.
No, I don't.
So section E, yeah, is about copying of body worn camera files. So one thing you'll note in this policy, it does talk a lot about copying these files. However, this is, especially with this new system, much less common than was before. So for instance, when we had the old system where the camera footage was either on a server here at Oakland Police or in the VView cloud, the officers, if they went to court, either the investigator would have had to make a copy of that officer's body worn camera first already when charging the case, or the officer might have to bring it in the court case of traffic court on a CD or DVD. That's obviously kind of a pain for all involved. So luckily now with this new evidence.com, we can actually send digitally a link to the footage through evidence.com to the DA's office, and they can then disseminate it to, for the disclosure to the defense. They can have it ready for trial or PX or preliminary investigation or examination or any other court proceedings, things like that. However, what this policy does do is it does set forth when and how personnel can make copies. So if they do require copies for court, they are able to do that with a first line supervisor or one of the system administrators. And then it sets forth for if there are any physical copies that aren't entered into evidence, how they need to be returned so that we maintain chain of custody of these. For our CID and investigative personnel, when they are charging these cases, they are responsible for obtaining copies or using evidence.com secure sharing capability to share. So we have either or, understanding that the Alameda County DA's office does use evidence.com, others might not. Yes, Pastor Thompson.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So that would mean, for instance, for E1 number 1, that as opposed to an officer receiving a CD, as you have said, it would be, that request would be made and it would be fulfilled digitally? Or are they receiving an MP4, or are they receiving something physically, or is this now a digital request?
So for the most part, it's digital. However, there might be times when the officers go to court, especially if it is not Alameda County Court, where they would be required to provide a copy of the body worn camera. So let's say if I made a
And that
stop.
copy is a CD, or is that an MP3 or MP4 or?
Oh yeah, good question. It is a digital file. So I believe it's an AVI file, but it's on
AVI
physical,
file.
yeah, it's on a physical
Okay.
medium, on a DVD.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So let's see. So back to number 2 of this of E1 there. So you'll see that the CID investigative personnel, these folks are authorized to make copies for their investigation and for charging these cases. However, we do sort of set forth some of the things that those personnel are required to do. So they document the reason for making a copy. They make sure to tell that person who's receiving the copy that it needs to be saved in a secure location, who receives it, and then finally, documentation of chain of custody and responsibility to secure that until that is either given to non-department personnel, the copy is admitted into evidence, or the copy is returned to OPD for destruction. See if we can go down to, oh yes, any questions on E1 there? Or anything like that before?
I'm just making up for all the meetings I had to miss with all my questions.
No, not at all, not at all, please.
However, with E1, is there any kind of signatory process, any kind of receipt of the disclosure that you just mentioned? Is there any kind of documentation process where the officer has to acknowledge that they have received that disclosure and handling information?
Yeah, good question. So for it is the same process that we use for any chain of custody. So because this is evidence, we actually do have an evidence policy. I believe it's like H1, H like Henry 1. But the manner in which the department handles chain of custody is that every person who handles it will typically write a report and saying that what they've done with the evidence, if they've given it to someone else or they've maintained it in a secure area or something like that, until finally it's booked into evidence or destroyed, in which case they'll make a notation, and we have an entire evidence ecosystem either in evidence.com or in this thing we call Evidence on Q, which is the database for our physical evidence.
I raise it because then maybe that reference you just made could be a note somewhere in this section so that folks will know what's laid out is already established and used department-wide in other areas.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah, we can reference chain of custody or H1 there. Let's see. So if we keep going to E2 there, this is public records requests. We do have a public records general order, M9.1, public records access. So those public records, any copies, there is a procedure that a records division mainly goes through there. So those are required to be redacted in department as required by law and policy. So we do have those, and it's just a reference back to those sections, but this does allow for those copies to be made, and they are frequently released. Now, if we moving on to E3, you can see that there are times when personnel might make copies of these files for reasons other than court. So for instance, occasionally we do have, and especially now during the pandemic, this is one of the reasons why this was written in, we had a lot of people working from home, or some of our supervisors and commanders, managers do a lot of their work from home. So for instance, I might have an investigation from a sergeant that I need to review, but I don't necessarily want to be here in the office until 9, 10 o'clock at night. So I take the file home or the DVD home and play it on a computer at my home, and I'm able to do my review at that point. So this is frequently, we'll see our deputy chiefs or our captains doing this, just because with the amount of review that they have to do, if they were to be in the office at all times, that would require them to be here basically like 16, 18 hours a day sometimes. So we do allow for them to make some copies. We do have a requirement that they put in the notes file, the reason why they're copying, who they are, and then there is a requirement that they maintain them in an appropriate case file in a secure location, and then to return those copies for destruction when they no longer need them. But this goes hand in hand with E4, this final section in this section, which is about prohibited copies. So this does make very clear personnel are prohibited from making unauthorized copies. They are prohibited from giving or showing copies of these without any lawful right to know and need to know unless authorized by the chief of police. And they are prohibited from posting or having someone else post copies of these video files on social media or public sites, again, unless authorized by the chief of police or his or her designee. So occasionally, of course, there are transparency laws that require us sometimes to post body worn camera within, say, 45 days of an incident where an officer shoots someone, for instance. And then there might be sometimes when the chief decides to release body worn camera footage for investigations or something, or, to try and help locate someone like that. But other than that, that this is prohibited. Yes, Vice Chair Peters.
I guess just for consistency, you have in 3, chief of police or designee. I'm wondering if you would put that under number 2, chief of police or designee.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
And you could keep the and. You could keep the and.
Okay. We'll make sure that part's. So that's the extent of E. That's really around copies, and like I said, not as much as we previously had in terms of copies, and just because physical sharing is, as we all know, is kind of going the way of the dinosaur, but still need to have it just in case.
Lieutenant, do I have it, Lieutenant?
Oh,
Turner?
yes, yes.
Okay. I want to make sure I have titles correct. My apologies, you may have said it. I've missed it in my growing delirium by the idea that it's still 95 degrees at this time of evening. But could you, just for context, give me an example of when it would be authorized to give or show copies of a video file to someone without a lawful right to know or need to know? Like, is there a situation where the chief would authorize that? And if so, any example you could provide would be helpful.
One I can think of off the bat is for a family of a victim or someone who had a family member who had police force used against them, and then the chief might decide that we were going to show that video. So that has happened before, where we have prior to public release of body worn camera video shown that to the family.
And that, in that instance, that is considered out of the scope of need to know.
Yes, because so what need to know and right to know are these legal terms around this criminal justice information. However, the chief can waive, or his or her designee can waive that.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that.
It's my pleasure.
Is there somewhere else we talked about digital sharing? This is just hard copy sharing, right?
So this is all sharing. Yeah. So copies do include digital or hard copies.
And that's referenced somewhere?
You know what, we maybe in E4 we can reference that just to make it very clear. I think that's a good idea to reference and ensure that everyone knows that it's both hard copies and digital copies. So let's see, any other questions on section E that's I can speak about section F, and I'll just kind of let you know that F and G especially are mainly administrative. G especially is administrative, and talks a lot about the things that we're required to talk about for the privacy ordinance. But F, there's really the main part here. So as you can see, there's removal requests for accidental recordings. This does have a a requirement through the command level, so at least a lieutenant or above. And we also, and what we see in practice, I will say, is that typically for accidental recordings, members or our employees just mark them as accidental and keep moving, and then they just get deleted automatically. We have very, very few requests for removal of accidental recordings, and I'd say probably 99% of those are when people accidentally activate them in the bathroom. And so we do review them, but then delete them. But the thing here that I think is probably most important for everyone to look at and think about is the data retention. So this is something that we did work out, or at least when there's a first pass of this document through the Privacy Advisory Committee. Their request was that we have a shorter retention period than what we had. So previously, before we got these Axon cameras, our retention period was pretty much indefinite. There was very little deletion of these videos for many reasons, mainly because we just hadn't set up a good retention schedule. And so instead, we do have this, and this is language that was agreed to with the Privacy Advisory Committee, but they do understand that they are somewhat subordinate to the police commission. They are a committee, you are a commission. However, they said they wanted 2 years, 2-year retention, unless there are things like this: criminal investigation, administrative investigation, for research, civil litigation, training, or review and possible release pursuant to a public records request. So those files that are not.
And what was their rationale for that, for the reduction in time?
So I'm just, in terms of what I remember from them, their rationale is around privacy of the community. So the idea being that if the police were to stop you or I, and nothing came of it, that it seems unfair to then have maybe 15 years later this video of a police interaction that's still floating around. Their idea is consistently sort of the idea of a right to be forgotten. And so that's, I think, where unless there is some need, and there are pretty broad needs in criminal investigation, administrative investigation, but unless there is a need, that video should be deleted in the interest of the privacy of the community, even though they have somehow interacted with a police officer with their camera on.
Thank you. The only thing that comes to mind is there are times, perhaps rare, when nothing comes of it, and then it comes up again in cases that may be closed in one situation and then reopened for another reason. Is that evidence now gone? I think is what's in the forefront of my mind.
Right. That is a frightening one. So the answer is it may be. If the crime is initially, and we do for criminal investigations, we have a sort of, and that's available on the ad hoc's website is that retention schedule that we have for these videos. But for instance, we do have differing retention schedule depending on the type of crime. So for misdemeanors, for instance, it's still going to be a shorter retention time. For felonies, nonviolent felonies, that will be longer. For violent felonies or murder, sex crimes, that retention will be indefinite. So even if, say, an officer goes to a crime of like a murder or something like that, we have no idea who did it. The case goes cold. It lies dormant for 20 years. That file will still be there because the retention schedule for violent crimes like murder is indefinite.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. And then finally, the access and deletion logs. No matter whether, another thing is that no matter whether a piece of evidence or video is deleted through the retention schedule, the audit logs are maintained indefinitely. So this is the log of what happened with that. So even though a video might be gone, the audit of what happened to that video, how it was deleted, things like that, who viewed it, when it was still available, all those things will be retained indefinitely. Let's see. then I think so. If we see G, so for anyone who's, and just for the sake of the record and anyone who's interested, most of these are requirements that you see in Oakland Municipal Code 9.64, the regulation on the city's acquisition and use of surveillance technology. So body-worn camera is considered a surveillance technology. So we talk about who the project administrator is here in G1 and what their roles are. I'm currently the project administrator for this body-worn camera project. There are many system administrators that we can see in G2. So for non-patrol assignments, the Bureau commanders set those. All the sergeants who are in field operations are system administrators, and they can do things like issue a new camera, or make sure that if an officer took the wrong camera, that those files are reassigned to that officer as opposed to staying on the original officer's camera. Things like that. They can make some copies for court. There is training and a requirement for training. This is something that's required in the ordinance. And then you see at the last two, G4 and G5, description of the technology and the of both the camera and the system. This is a requirement that in the use policy for any surveillance technology, that they have a description of the technology in there. So that is the extent of the body-worn camera policy. Actually, those last two sections relatively technical, and we've reached the end.
Great. And we've just about reached the end of this evening's meeting. So who accepts the changes and then gives us a clean copy for one last swipe? Chair? Is the chair still in the meeting?
Yeah, but actually we'll, I know Officer Cervantes has been making all the notes. Why don't we do this? We can, I think there's a few things we need to incorporate. And I know we noted a couple areas where language was unclear. So we need to sort of work on that a bit from some great suggestions from all of you. So why don't we do that? Send that out in the email, and then we can have our next meeting sort of be talking about that, and then any questions people had or wanted to come back to, or we can move on.
Clean up.
Yeah, at the pleasure of the commissioners.
Okay, because we need to get this on the agenda. Yeah, and I know we need to get the schedule from Chair Malele.
Yeah, I'm just running my mouth with my mic off. Okay, I have a couple of questions and additions at the beginning of the policy. So can we go back to that? Specifically up to on page 2, and that is A2. And let's see, we got that list of 7. Number 7, all of the rest of them say unauthorized use, members are, and then 7 just says during any meetings. So we need some kind of sort of introductory language there to make it consistent with what we are saying. You say members shall follow the express prohibitions regarding the BWC system. And then you say what they can and can't do. But then 7, you just say during any meetings. Does that mean members shall not intentionally use the BWC or record during any meetings or the conference? So we should add that language in there.
Yes.
So just like we have for 6, members shall not intentionally use the BWC to record or use the BWC during any meetings with a confidential informant.
Yes.
And then and these are just almost cosmetic changes more than anything. Just doing a fresh read, and I have a question over on B9. And 5, higher ranking members probably should be a plural. Shall note the reasoning for the deactivation. It's or it says they receive an order from a higher ranking member. higher ranking member shall note the reasoning, or unless you want to say a higher ranking member shall note the reasoning. But I would put an S, I'd put an S on members.
Or maybe we could say that higher ranking member.
Yeah,
shall
would be
note the
fine.
reason, because it's-
Mhm.
yeah, we want the person who's giving the order to be the one saying why they did it.
Yes, that's true. Okay, yeah, so that higher ranking member shall. Okay, and then in number 7 there, I had a question, and my question is why? And it says that they're at a location where they are not likely to have interaction or a chance encounter with the suspect. For example, an outer perimeter post, traffic control post, etc. With respect to the outer perimeter post, so I know you set a perimeter and everything, but stuff happens. Sometimes somebody escapes from the perimeter. So I'm kind of like, why don't they keep their cameras on in those kinds of circumstances? The traffic control posts, okay, maybe not.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering, my question was, why are we saying it's okay? Because
Right,
stuff happens. It's not common, but
right.
stuff happens, and having a camera on just might catch a fleeing suspect or fleeing person, or might even catch an auto accident, a hit and run or something. So
Well, in Oakland, who knows what you might catch with the camera?
exactly.
However, I
But
think, this is one of those ones where, yeah, that sort of police jargon and maybe glossary terms would have served us. So this does specifically talk about outer perimeter posts because it envisions these larger incidents. So now normally, when we're kind of, I wouldn't say run of the mill law enforcement, but I'm chasing after a person maybe who's just burglarized a home or something like that. We form a perimeter, but larger incidents, we have what's called an inner perimeter and then an outer perimeter. And so that's why we name outer perimeter there. The inner perimeter is the one that is designed to capture the person, the
Right.
suspect. That one, we expect officers to have their cameras on. The outer perimeter is the one that is designed to sort of keep for want of a better word, looky-loos, people from
Okay.
sort of getting in the way.
Okay.
That is a little further out. So that's why we have that distinction in there.
Okay, then, all right. Well, those were the only 2 questions. Okay, I'm fine with that then, since it would be unlikely that the person would probably escape the inner perimeter.
That's right. Well, that's
And,
yes, that's the hope at least.
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, those were my comments at the beginning. So we're at the end. We've gone through, and it's almost 7:30 or so anyway, which is perfect timing. 7:25 now. Any thoughts, concerns? We got our next meeting week after next. And so what we're going to do is OPD is going to make these changes and everything, and then circulate a new draft to us. And at the next meeting, we should be in a position to get final approval and pass it on, at least ad hoc final approval, and put it on the agenda for a meeting. This is great. Great.
Excellent.
All right, thank you. And we'll make sure Jesse, as I mentioned, Jesse was unable to make it tonight. He's an excused absence, Commissioner Shea, but we'll see if he has any comments about anything as well.
Yes.
But maybe one more meeting, one more meeting of the ad hoc, Commissioner Peterson, might be it.
Yep.
Oh, that's what one other question.
Mhm.
The glossary that you wanted, Commissioner Peterson, is that something you want us to have included in this, or is that sort of a kind of a long-term outside policy,
Well,
outside desire, wish list?
Lieutenant Turner kind of answered it. It's not like we want one just for this, but
Okay.
Since these terms are used interchangeably throughout other policies, I just think it's it would be helpful to the public.
Okay.
And I would add that in some of the model policies that were listed on the website related to this particular commission, some of those policies did have a brief glossary of terms, things like OID, just, phrases, things like that, that were particular to their document. And so if there was, there are models available, is my point. So there might
Okay.
be a way to you're not trying to wordsmith or define every single thing or every internal police reference, but there are some things I think that could be noted because they're repeated throughout the document, or with an asterisk, somebody can flip back to the cover page and say, oh, okay, that means Office of Internal Audit, whatever the reference is. So maybe they want to check back with some of those model documents that were lifted up.
Okay, and you'd like any, a draft glossary for the next version, before we get final approval? Is that what I'm hearing from Pastor
And maybe
Thompson?
I could assist with that, or Commissioner Peterson could as well, in just identifying what some of those terms could be, so that it's not
Okay.
exhaustive and it's not left up to the officers too, because they know what it means. So it's not left up to
Right.
them to identify. So as a layperson, maybe we can
Okay.
just lift up a couple of things that would be helpful if they were spelled out.
Okay,
So
then,
I can do that before our next meeting, or have that done.
okay, then, so then we have, we can send it to the whole group or send it to Lieutenant Turner and to Officer Cervantes.
We'll do.
Anybody who has any concern. And Jody, I see your hand is up. I'm going to come to you in a second. And so, yeah, if anybody has any suggestions for glossary terms, to send those to Lieutenant Turner and to Officer Cervantes. Jody, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with that. And I was just gonna say, in cases where it makes sense, where there are also additional policies that are referenced that people might not understand what it means. I know we had talked about inserting that as a footer, but thinking about how the glossary could also support scaffolding kind of people's comprehension of some of the things that are mentioned, if it's pointing to or referencing another policy. And it's not, I don't think it's 100% requirement, but thinking about how that could be supportive and helpful for a better understanding. But I agree with the glossary as well.
Okay, all right. And Jason, go ahead.
I just wanted to say this is my last meeting. I'm leaving CPRA at the end of this week, and I just want to thank you.
Really? Oh, thank you, Jason, for your long years of service. How long have you been with CPRA?
9 months.
Oh, I mean, for your your long months of service. I don't know why I thought you were a long-termer.
No,
Okay,
you're
well, thank you.
Probably thinking of Karen Tom, who.
Oh, okay, all right.
But
Well,
thank you for letting me.
so much.
Thank you for letting me participate in this process. It's been very enlightening, and I appreciate how deliberative and detailed all the comments were. So
Great. Well, thank you for being here and for sharing your thoughts and concerns and ideas, excellent. Thank you very much and good luck to you. Okay, if there is nothing further, then we can adjourn. It is 7:30 on the nose by my clock. So we can adjourn, and I'll see everybody in 2 weeks, which is going to be the 20th, 6
This
p.m.
month- This month
Yeah.
is going fast.
Which
Yeah.
may be our last meeting. Okay, then.
Okay,
Excellent. Thank you
I'm gonna
all.
miss that meeting because I'm
Goodbye.
gonna be in Chicago at a training.
Oh, no, Katie. Okay. Well, we're gonna miss you. So you, if there's anything you want to add or anything, to anything more, for example, on the glossary stuff, make sure that you email us, okay?
Will do.
All right, and thank you for your participation and everything. And we don't know how we'll do it. We may well end up having this approved at an open forum or something. We'll talk with the chair to see how we do this, but we may schedule an open forum on one of the Thursdays at the end of one of our meetings so that we can get input from the community on this and before it goes up for final approval by the commission, but we'll let everybody know the next steps. Okay, great. Thank you all. Thank you.
All
And
right,
Jason,
everybody
as a
have
member,
good
of the
Good
public,
night.
all right, if we do have an open forum, Jason, you can still participate as a member of the public.
okay,
Okay.
thank you. I may do that.
Okay, then. All right. All right. Thank you all. Take care. Have a good evening.